Okay. Hello. Today I wanted to talk about the paradox of existing. Bit of a heavy topic for my first philosophy-esque video in a while, but I thought it'd be interesting. So, first off, how exactly do we define something that is existing or exists? The official textbook definition would be having objective reality or being. Second is live, especially under adverse conditions. Another way I think it could be described is that something that is capable of being perceived and understood could also be considered something that exists, such as yourself and your own actions. Because as you go through your everyday life, you are perceiving not only yourself, but others as well. Now, where the paradox comes in from this is how, at least from what I believe, is that once something dies, human or otherwise, it simply, at least consciousness, ceases to exist entirely. So, to be capable of perceiving, experiencing, remembering, and understanding one moment, and then suddenly, or not so suddenly, but eventually one dies, or you die, and whereas before you were capable of perceiving, remembering, and understanding, all of a sudden that is no longer applicable, and is not occurring, which becomes truly confusing, as you exist and perceive, but once you die, as I had said, you are no longer. And so how can you truly be certain that you actually exist in the moment, or that you would ever actually die? But the thing is, all things die, whether plant or animal, and even in more abstract ways, sometimes ideas and concepts die, or at least to a certain degree. It was originally René Descartes who said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, and the very fact that you are which means that the very fact you are capable of perceiving your own existence in and of itself means that you do exist, but once you die, you are not capable of perceiving anything. And so if you were to die and all memories and consciousness are gone, how were you able at any point in time capable of perceiving and existing to begin with? Which is something I basically just said a moment ago, but phrased differently. But it still stands, how no matter how you go about this, it just ends up becoming a spiral, just like many things to do with extreme abstract thought and reality, which will likely become a theme on this channel, philosophy-wise at least. Now another thing pertaining to this topic would be things that do not exist but technically do exist. This would be things such as art and fiction, video games, all sorts of different media, from books to pictures to drawing specifically. All of these things, and video games, all of these things do in some way exist as we are capable of perceiving and understanding them, but through no means other than either our own imagination or strictly through a screen and complex to simpler pixels on that screen. And yet these things do not actually exist in what we call the real world or the physical world, as they cannot actually be touched or manifested, and so it does not exist, and yet at the same time it does exist at the very least as an idea or imagination, since we are again capable of interacting with it at least to some degree via the media which it is presented, primarily what I am thinking of being video games and drawings, animation. Even when we touch into live-action TV series, actual actors were capable of making that a reality, and so it just is a reality. But then we get into things that are strictly drawn or CGI'd, 3D'd sculptures, in which they are not physical things, and yet we are still capable of looking at them and seeing them in some form or manner. And while they do not technically exist within the material world, they do still, to some degree, exist. And then you have people who will see things in video games and then create live 3D sculptures. So now a 3D sculpture of this object exists. To make it a little more easy to view, take what is in the background footage here. The boss I'm fighting does not actually exist in the real world, and yet some people have likely created 3D prints or sculptures of it, as well as drawings, but I'm going to focus on the 3D sculptures for now. Even once brought into reality in this form, while the 3D print of the boss known as Baal the Dread exists, the actual creature in and of itself technically does not, and yet to some degree it does, because the very idea of it is there. Which again pertains to the fact that existing in the end is the capability of how it is able to be perceived and recognized, understood, and remembered. And yet, given how long humans have actually been around for, compared to how much of history is actually recorded, how many things, primarily concepts, had once existed but now no longer do? How many people had once existed that we cannot so much as find the bones of anymore? No matter how much something seems to exist, how much you are able to perceive, the moment you stop. To put this into a more personal way of relating to what I said earlier, spiraling a bit, but again, it's kind of the nature of some of these. I am capable of perceiving, remembering, and understanding my own actions in the moment, and yet, within the next, even so, 5 minutes, that is no longer actually currently happening. And so, sometimes I ask myself the question of, had that ever really happened? Which is a bit of a paranoid and also unrealistic thought, but it is something I still sometimes often think about. And then there's also thinking about how eventually I will die. And yet, in some ways, it seems as if the very fact that I am capable of perceiving, understanding, and remembering my own existence in this moment is somehow proof in and of itself that I am incapable of dying, which is very unrealistic, and if I were to truly believe that, could even be considered egotistical. And the most difficult part of this is that you are never capable of perceiving, remembering, and understanding through another person's lens, though it is always best to assume that that person does it in at least a similar manner to you, as you are not the only person to actually exist, because again, while you are not actively perceiving through them, you are still perceiving that person. And so, like many other things, when we truly go in depth and begin to think about the abstract or even or perhaps even extremely literal of it, our existence will never really make any true sense, and yet, for that reason, the fact that we are here to begin with is to some degree a miracle, I suppose.